Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you're all having a good day. Ender pearls are something I don't use a whole lot. No, wait, back up. Let me try this again. One of the questions I probably get asked the most is how I keep Minecraft worlds interesting. How I have, like, the stamina, the willpower, the, creativity or whatever to continue playing in a Minecraft world for a really long amount of time. And one of the things that really helps me keep doing different stuff in my Minecraft world every single day is to focus on an aspect of Minecraft that I don't use enough. And ender pearls are what we're going to focus on today, because I really do not use ender pearls enough. I've got a whole shulker box full of them in my ender chest for emergencies. I've got a farm which produces so many of them, I've actually had to start throwing them away. They make it possible to bridge massive gaps in your world, explore further than you've explored before, and potentially get you out of a couple of sticky situations. So why is it that ender pearls are so neglected? By me specifically, I should clarify, not just by people in general. Because people in general have come up with some really interesting ideas for how to use ender pearls, and so we're going to explore a few of those today in the hopes that it'll kind of encourage me to use ender pearls more frequently in my world, or think about what the possibilities are, because really, they're pretty spectacular. I think my first problem is I'm not very good at throwing them, and that's really down to a matter of practice, but I don't always know what the range of an ender pearl is going to be, and it's often difficult to check where exactly you'll land when you're throwing ender pearls. One of the ways I've seen people suggest getting around this is to have snowballs around, which is obviously, requires you to grab some snow at short notice, which is not always the most convenient thing. But what snowballs allow you to do is take a look at the trajectory of a projectile thrown by the player, because the angle at which you throw a snowball will be the exact angle at which you throw an ender pearl. So wherever the snowball lands, you're pretty much guaranteed to land there with an ender pearl too. And since snow is pretty abundant, it's nice and easy to farm. If you create a snow golem, you can pretty much grab a bunch of snowballs at short notice, which is sometimes a little bit less hassle than going and farming ender pearls. You can, of course, also do the same thing with eggs. Eggs are thrown in exactly the same way as both snowballs and ender pearls, and there's the added bonus that there might be a chicken there when you land. But aside from basic throws, and obviously the crafting recipes that involve them, like crafting ender chests and end crystals to resummon the dragon, there are a couple of other really interesting traits that we can apply to ender pearls, and we're going to start off by grabbing my Riptide Trident for this. And to start off by acknowledging that on Java Edition, apologies to the Bedrock players in the house, you can throw ender pearls from your offhand. So if we get into the water with a Riptide Trident here, the water will kind of take priority because the Riptide Trident is in my main hand, and I should be able to launch myself into the air. If I let go of right-click to use Riptide and then I right-click again to throw an ender pearl, the momentum of my Riptide launch is going to be added to the momentum of my ender pearl, so I can throw it much further than I normally could. And in this example, end up landing in the middle of the ocean. But it's kind of interesting to see how easily we can cross large distances like this. As an example, let's see how many ender pearls it takes me to cross this ocean without using Riptide first. I'm gonna probably give myself a stack in the hotbar just to make this nice and easy to measure out. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, oh, almost there, and 7. Okay, so 7 ender pearls it took us to cross from roughly over there by spawn to over here. Now let's try the same thing again with a stack of ender pearls in my hand and a Riptide Trident. That's 1, 2... Oh my gosh, I landed in a tree. That was 2 throws, and I landed in a tree about, 30 blocks from the actual shore. That was wild. I've genuinely never tried this before, and that was incredible. Now, of course, most of the time when we're just cruising around, we're probably going to be using Elytra and rockets, so the Riptide and ender pearl method isn't necessarily the most convenient thing in the world. However, there have been a couple of occasions on which I've actually run out of gunpowder because I don't spend a great deal of time AFKing at my mob farm, and we might end up introducing a larger scale creeper farm or ghast farm in future to deal with the gunpowder shortage in my world, but of course the problem is we're going to have to AFK at one of those as well, and if I end up traveling to them and I can't reach the AFK point high up there in the sky, that presents a bit of a problem. But I want to get good enough at ender pearl throwing that I can Riptide up from here and then hit the scaffolding on there. And I don't know if I'm going to hit my AFK point or if I'm going to drastically overshoot. It looks like I've probably overshot. Yeah, well, I landed in the water on the opposite side of the mob farm. And after a couple of attempts, I'm getting the impression that I'm either throwing it too high or the ender pearl doesn't like to land on scaffolding. So maybe I'll have to rely on just Riptide to get me up here for now. But the idea is at least that we have a few other ways of getting around. Now, setting the trident back in the box, because to be honest, I don't see myself using that too often, one of the other cool things we can do with ender pearls is experiment with ender pearl stasis chambers. And this is where I think things get a little bit more practical and useful for the average player. So let's go over the concept real quick. Ender pearls, when they are thrown, become a kind of falling entity, and the entity's properties aren't all that different from something like a dropped item. So, for example, an ender pearl can be suspended in a bubble column. We can do the same thing with a snowball here, actually. If I throw that in there, you'll notice that it comes to the surface and it just starts bobbing up and down as a thrown snowball. And it won't be destroyed until it makes contact with something, in this case, this trapdoor that we're going to flip down over the top of it. Kind of similar to how if we throw a grass block in here, that's going to bounce up to the surface, although the grass block bounces a couple more times and it has momentum in the direction that it's thrown in a different way to ender pearls, snowballs, and other projectiles. You can even do this with a bow if you want to, although obviously the velocity at which you fire a bow is dependent on how long you draw the arrow back for. But what we're going to do is throw an ender pearl directly downwards into this bubble column. So we're standing right on the edge of the glass here, looking straight down. I cannot move my mouse down any further. We're going to throw the ender pearl, and then it will rise to the top of this bubble column and become suspended there permanently. Now, this still retains all of the properties of an ender pearl that we've thrown in any other way, meaning that once it makes impact with a block, we will return to that block. But until that happens, the ender pearl is effectively just suspended here, and we can walk away and do whatever we want to. The only time anything's going to happen to that ender pearl, and the only time that we're going to be affected by it, is if this trapdoor flips down. And if we do that, you'll notice that I'm automatically transported on top of the trapdoor, and because the ender pearl makes impact on the underside of the trapdoor, I end up falling down into the bubble column. But this introduces a bunch of really interesting possibilities. For example, what if we activate the trapdoor remotely using a redstone component like a daylight detector? Daylight detectors are going to output a redstone signal for the majority of the day, being strongest at around noon, and it slowly increases throughout the day and then decreases after noon until it gets towards nighttime. Once we're about 30 to 40 seconds into nighttime, the daylight detector will actually switch off, and when it does that, it's going to flip down this trapdoor, meaning that effectively we can use this as a way of teleporting ourselves back here automatically at night. So during the day, we can run off and do whatever we want to, but let's say we want to sleep for the night, maybe we're taking care of some villagers nearby or something like that. All we need to do is throw an ender pearl into here, make sure a daylight detector is attached to the trapdoor, walk off and do whatever we want to. For the sake of this demonstration, I am going to leave a bed up here. Then I'm going to walk around, tidy up spawn a little, maybe work on the path between my storage room and my house, deal with any pillager patrols that happen to wander on through. And as the sun starts to go down, the redstone signal on that daylight detector will slowly decrease. And once it reaches 0 and the daylight detector is no longer outputting any redstone signal, the trapdoor is going to flip closed. And just like that, oh, didn't quite work out because I was moving at the time, but we magically get transported to the center of the world. And I can scaffold up here and sleep, because I need to sleep at this point. But then since we've been teleported back to our bubble column, all we need to do for the next day is throw another ender pearl down in here. This will reset the system, and we can go about our business and do the same thing. So if you want something that automatically returns you home at the end of the night, you just have to install something like this right next to your bed. Now, naturally, there are some limitations to this. We're building this at spawn because these chunks of the world are always loaded, and perhaps most importantly, redstone always takes effect inside a certain area of the spawn chunks. And you can look up the exact area of that on the Minecraft wiki. There is an outer boundary of the spawn chunks in which redstone actions aren't processed, like redstone dust won't light up, components won't power stuff, that kind of thing. So it is important if you're building one of these and then traveling far away from it to build it in the spawn chunks, because this area of the world will stay loaded provided that you don't have a couple of mods or settings or something like that that disable the constant loading of the spawn chunks for performance reasons. But if we were to build this anywhere else in the world, we would need to have these chunks loaded and also, crucially, within our simulation distance, which is controlled by this slider in our video settings, so that this ender pearl teleporter could even work. If I built this over at my dripstone cave, for example, those chunks wouldn't be loaded while I was here. So if I wanted to take a day trip back to spawn, I couldn't be automatically teleported back to the dripstone cave base because the ender pearl teleporter just wouldn't be loaded. It would only take effect once those chunks loaded in, and whatever we set up to trigger the mechanism actually happened. So to be used to its fullest potential, potential, this kind of system has to be set up at spawn, which is absolutely fine for a single-player world like the one we're working in here, but obviously on multiplayer servers and things like that might have to be done with permission of whoever controls the central spawn area. It also potentially leaves you open to shenanigans, because if this water becomes flowing water, there is potential for the ender pearl to be moved around. You can also remove water sources from underneath it, and yeah, there you go. Like so, it ends up flowing in weird directions. So be aware that when you're working with other players, there may be the opportunity for a bamboozle. It's also worth noting that these columns have to be a minimum of 6 blocks high. I was using 7 blocks before, but I think 6 is probably the lower limit. Any shorter than that, and you end up risking throwing your ender pearl into the soul sand at the bottom of this. So if I throw this down from there, yeah, as you can see, I ended up impacting on my own ender pearl on the way back up, which was kind of bizarre, actually. But with 5 blocks worth of bubble column water, it's not enough to reverse the momentum of the ender pearl, and you'll end up hitting the soul sand block at the bottom. So you need to make sure this is at least 6 blocks deep. I was using 7 to begin with, but I think 6 is the lower limit. There's also nothing to stop you making multiple of these, so if you feel like teleporting yourself around your base via a system of buttons and ender pearls, you can always throw an ender pearl into one of these stasis chambers and then press a button and have another stasis chamber somewhere else activate to teleport you over there. These ender pearls will even stay persistent if you log out and back in. So if I log out of my world now and reload it like so, once we get back into spawn, I'll be able to flip that trapdoor closed, and the ender pearl still works. It still teleports me onto the trapdoor. So it does seem like that is pretty reliable as a mechanic. So I want to take this one step further, and I think for this example we're going to rebuild our bubble column in the ground instead of having it sticking out of the ground 7 blocks high like this. Okay, so let's say this here is our ender pearl stasis chamber. If we're going to throw an ender pearl in there, it should be suspended until it makes impact with this trapdoor right here. And we could, once again, do that timed by the day-night cycle. So we can use a daylight detector to detect when the sun reaches a certain height, and that's because it's going to output a specific redstone signal at certain times of day. Right now, with the sun just rising, it's only outputting a signal strength of 9. Once the sun reaches its zenith, once it reaches the highest point in the sky before it starts heading towards the western horizon, it's going to be outputting a signal strength of 15. And so naturally, we can do what we've been doing over at the copper aging facility and measure that with a redstone comparator, with a side input comparator with a full cake. Once again, we're using cake as the redstone comparator component here. This is going to output a signal strength of 14. So only when the signal from the daylight detector reaches 14 or more is this going to turn on this comparator. And that means that we can force the comparator to only switch on at the very middle point of the day. We can have that activate a block here, like this redstone lamp. The redstone lamp will switch on when it gets to the middle of the day. The power to the redstone lamp can also power this dropper, which, much like the counting circuit in our copper aging facility, is going to push out one item from the dropper here each time the day gets to the middle point of the day and this comparator switches on. So effectively, it's going to count how many days have passed. Probably one of the slower redstone clocks we're going to build in this world. There we go, the redstone lamp has turned on because the sun has reached a certain height. It's not quite the middle of the day yet, but it's enough to have this signal strength output at 14, which is working for this comparator. Now, of course, it's only going to do that once per day, of course, which means even if the signal strength increases by 1 more, it's not going to power this redstone lamp again, meaning that the dropper is only going to have spat out one item into this other dropper. So it's only going to do this once per day. We don't have to worry about the sun reaching the exact noonday height. If we wanted to do that, of course, we could always put a full container here instead of a cake, but that's outputting a signal strength of 14 instead of 15. Of course, what we're then going to do is use a comparator to measure how many items are here in this dropper, and that's going to provide the redstone signal, which is going to activate this trapdoor. Obviously, we can put a side input redstone signal here with whatever we want to, really, and the best way of doing this, I think, is going to be to once again use unstackable items and measure it using another dropper. So right here I have a bunch of junky old items which are unstackable. There's a nearly broken set of shears, a golden axe that I probably got off of a piglin or something, some golden boots, and a flint and steel. Note that this is a dropper, not a dispenser, so it's not going to try and use the flint and steel the way a dispenser would. Each time this daylight detector powers the comparator enough, it's going to output one of these into this dropper here. And if we put 4 unstackable items into this dropper, let's do that temporarily with a spyglass, a bed, I guess a couple of my tools or something. We could also just use 4 stacks of stackable items if we wanted to. In fact, you know what? Let's use 4 stacks of ender pearls. The 4 stacks of ender pearls will have the same value to a comparator as 4 unstackable items, meaning that this comparator here is only going to switch on when it meets or exceeds the signal coming into the side here, which means it will only switch on when all 4 of those unstackable items have made it into the dropper. Once it does that, we're going to have some redstone dust outputting into this block here, which could actually be a target block now that I think of it. That'd be a kind of a smart use of target blocks. Of course, I'm a fool. We need to invert the signal because what the redstone is doing here is actually powering the trapdoor to keep it open, not closing it. So redstone doesn't actually reverse the state of trapdoors. That was silly mistake on my part. So let's say what we could do instead is put a solid block here and we'll have a redstone torch on the back of this, which is going to depower once it receives power from this redstone comparator. If I take the items out of here, the trapdoor is going to flip up. If we put the items back in, the trapdoor is going to flip down. And my ender pearl has already broken in there, so we're going to have to throw another one in for the sake of this demonstration. But the sun is rising and the circuit should complete relatively soon once this reaches a power level of 14. So once the sun reaches about there in the sky, we should see this trapdoor flips down and will be teleported back to that location. So I'm actually going to fly away and see how far I can get before that happens. All right, we've made it over the ocean. We're headed towards the jungle. The cave spider spawner is right down there. Let's see if we can make it as far as the dripstone cave base before we get recalled to spawn. This will actually be a really good test of whether it does recall us to spawn, because it always feels a little bit weird leaving those chunks behind. However, it is a pretty apt demonstration of the spawn chunks staying loaded for redstone operations like this. We should be heading down this river a little way, and we might even encounter the ink farm if we're headed in the right direction. I think we're a little bit further off this way. Yep, there's the tower for the ink farm. The sun isn't quite high enough in the sky yet to activate that daylight detector, but we should be able to make it just into the dripstone cave. All right, here we are. We're in. We've made it to the dripstone cave. The sun should be reaching its height relatively soon. And bam! There we go. I was in a chest at the time, but we ended up getting teleported back to spawn. I was ready to quit the chest GUI, and so I paused the game by mistake. But we were all the way over there at the dripstone cave. That's about 1,200 blocks out, maybe a little bit more. So this works perfectly. And that would have been a 4-day timer in this example. So we could have gone exploring for a few days and then been automatically teleported back here without the need to waste all of those fireworks on a return trip. I want to find a permanent place to set this up because I really like this concept. I think that could be useful for going out and exploring the world in more detail, especially once Minecraft 1.19, the wild update, arrives and we're going looking for the deep, darkened mangrove swamps and stuff like that. It'll be helpful to have some kind of idea of our coordinates just in case we get teleported by mistake, but this is so reliable you could even set a timer on your phone or something like that. And so with every Minecraft day being 20 minutes, you could give yourself an hour to go exploring with 3 items in here and 3 stacks of items in this dropper. I think it's a really neat way of using this technology. Of course, it does rely on a situation in which you can make sure a daylight detector has complete access to the sky. You can put glass over the top of these, but tinted glass or other solid blocks, basically anything that blocks light, is going to cause a problem for a daylight detector. So you either need to have this on top of your builds somewhere, or you've got to have it someplace where the only thing blocking the daylight from getting to it is going to be stuff like glass blocks, completely transparent blocks that will let the light all the way through. I don't know if I want to set this up in my house necessarily, because frankly I don't use my starter house all that much anymore. It's a convenient place to sleep when I'm down here explaining stuff, but that's about it. I think maybe I would want to have it at my storage system, because imagine on the top floor of there where we've got our shulker box loader, we could go on a mining trip somewhere out there in the world, somewhere we're probably never going to return to again, grab a bunch of shulker boxes of material, make sure we have them on us when the timer goes off, because you wouldn't want to just leave one somewhere out there in the world, but then once we got teleported back here, we could just throw them into the shulker box unloader and they'd all be loaded into the system. I like that idea so much, I think I'm going to go and build it up there right now. So be right back. We're going to set up the whole thing again over there at our storage system. And a short time later, we have the mechanism rebuilt over here in one corner of our storage room, so we can just head down there and throw a bunch of shulker boxes into the shulker box unloader. Above this daylight sensor here, we do have an open column with a glass block at the top to make sure that it can read the sky light. We might even clear away a few of the leaves from there and make sure we don't farm any trees up there just in case. But of course, this whole thing can be more or less boxed off so that we are only seeing the area where we come out. The dropper here is one thing we might want to adjust adjust. Let's say we want to have fewer items in here or more items in here. We can always throw a bunch of extra items. It looks like it's just activated for the first time, actually. We can throw a bunch of extra items in here if we want our day trip to go a little bit longer. If we want to be spending 2 hours out there, we can throw 6 items in, and we can match that with 6 items in here, and that way it'll allow us to stay out there for 2 hours before the ender pearl that we've thrown in here impacts on the trapdoor and we get returned. But I think we'll probably leave some aspects of this contraption a little more open so that they are more freely adjustable, and we could redesign it and reorient it a little bit if we wanted to, just so that stuff is a little bit more accessible. So you have like an input on this side and an output on this side, and you just make sure those two are the same or equivalent amounts if you want to make sure that the ender pearl isn't going to teleport you back for a few extra days. I think I'm probably going to grab a couple of barrels from over here. I have plenty of barrels in storage, and that way we can just leave some ender pearls here in a barrel to make sure we've always got one to throw into the system. And it also gives me a good excuse to revisit the enderman farm and actually bring home some of the ender pearls instead of just leaving them to despawn or throwing them into the void. Last of all, it will make sense to grab a couple more non-stackable items. That way they're easily accessible if we want to add them to the timer at any point. And I think some of these junky tools and armor that we've got from the end, the ones that have like Curse of Binding or Curse of Vanishing on, will make some pretty good timer items, I think. So maybe we'll tuck this barrel in a corner there, and that can have a few extra items for us to add to the timers. I think that works out pretty well. Well, folks, thank you so much for watching this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide. I'm excited about what we're going to be doing with ender pearls in the future of this series, and there are still a couple of other tricks up our sleeves that I think we can explore in future episodes. But for now, thank you so much for watching this episode. My name has been Pixlriffs. Please don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see more, and I'll see you folks soon. Take care. Bye for now.